Good morning, everyone. It's really great honor for me to introduce Professor Barbara Oakley here. I know this is her first time to visit Taiwan, and of course, this is the first talk in Taiwan, so we are so lucky in this sense. I want to introduce Professor Barbara Oakley from 3 aspects. I will keep it very short. The first one, I want to emphasize Professor Oakley is the most well-known Coursera instructor. She has a very popular course called Learning How to Learn, and taken by more than millions of students from 200 countries. And she also was invited to be the keynote speaker in Coursera partners meetings to all the Coursera instructors and also the administration. So that's a really big things. The second one, I want to introduce Professor Oakley. She wrote a book. The book is called A Mind for Numbers, How to Excel Math and Science. It's not strange a professor write a book, but her book is different. It was a New York Times best-selling science book. It's a very, very, very important book. And I feel that Oakley has a true MOOC spirit, spreading knowledge, use all kinds of different technology and channels. And the third one, Professor Oakley obtained the Chester Carlson Award for American Society Engineering Education. That award is a big award. It's only for those exceptional innovators who move the engineering education forward. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome me please join me to welcome Professor Oakley together. So there's a...
Okay, great. Thank you so much. We're getting everything hooked in here, so it's such an honor to be here. I can say one phrase in Chinese, 我喝啤酒. You have no idea how hard I worked at that. So we'll get this going here. But I'd like to begin by just saying that I'm a professor of engineering at Oakland University in Michigan, and I'm a visiting scholar at UC San Diego. So you might wonder, how did that ever happen, right? It is, as it turns out, I had to give a presentation for the National Academy of Sciences. And here I am, I'm just this little engineering professor, from the Midwest, and I'm speaking at one of the most august institutions in the United States. And so, I gave my presentations, a very controversial topic, and my moderator really liked it. And turns out my moderator is Terry Sinowski, who's my co-instructor in the MOOC. And he said, I really like your research, but it turns out that okay, we need the password here, okay. Let's see, Vagana? It's not coming up. Oh, where's this? No, okay. And no, we're not here yet. So what Terry Sinowski said was, your research is very important, and another very important area in this country is math and science education. And I said, Terry, it just so happens I'm working on a book about that. Terry said, really, can I write the foreword? And I said, could I just die and go to heaven? And so we decided we should do a MOOC about that, because the thing is, if you really want to reach people, it's harder to read a book than to watch a video. And I knew MOOCs were really a great way to reach out to people. So Terry said, no problem. I've got an appointment at UC San Diego. We'll just do a MOOC together. So he goes to them and they say, you know, that's fine, we'll do it with you, but who's she? She's not from our institution. So that killed that, except that one night Terry had dinner with Daphne Caller, who's a good friend of his, and she's the co-founder of Coursera. He explained his little problem, and that evening I got an email from UC San Diego, and it said, the MOOC is all open for you. You can start working on it. And in English we have the expression, you know, there's the dog that chases the car, but what does the dog do when it catches the car, right? Well, I felt like the dog that had just caught the car. So what we're going to cover today is what MOOC making can do for you, some key aspects of learning, so from the MOOC itself, and then how we can use MOOCs to leverage learning. So here is me at my day job in Michigan, right, I'm getting ready to go to work. And this is my colleague, Terry Sanowski, the Francis Crick Professor at the Salk Institute. So really, what are the odds that, you know, here he is on the beach, right? That's where he goes for his days, and that's me. And what MOOCs can do is they can create new relationships between really, really interesting researchers. And that's certainly what happened for me. Now, UC San Diego, or the MOOC itself, is Learning How to Learn. And it is the world's largest and most popular massive open online course. We're approaching 1.5 million students now. It's the world's most popular course. And here's the upshot. It was made for less than $5,000. So I was invited to speak at Harvard. I walked into the room at Harvard and I was shocked. Here I am again. I'm just a little Midwestern engineer, and the room was completely packed with Harvard, MIT, Kennedy School, just a variety of people, and from the most august institutions in the United States. And I thought, why is this room so full of people? And it's because our one little MOOC, made for less than $5,000, has on the order of the same number of students as all 60 of Harvard's MOOCs put together, made for millions of dollars with hundreds of people. So what that tells you is there is a lot that we can do that it's actually much more within our reach than we ever might believe. You might say, well, you could do it that way because you're a professor of engineering. You could do it really inexpensively. But here's the trick. When I got stuck, I would ask a local high school student. So the younger generation really understands how to make these things, and it's actually not rocket science. It's very simple. However, I found out when you say this, when you're speaking with people at Harvard, you should not say it's not rocket science, because when they do it, they say it's rocket science. But that's part of why people don't watch their MOOCs as much. So online, in fact, is a very highly competitive environment. It mixes academia with Silicon Valley, with Hollywood. And all of these things come together to create an immersion experience that actually can create a more effective learning experience for learners. Now you might say, well, MOOCs are kind of a second best sort of thing. They're an alternative, but they're not as good as in-class teaching. But I want to remind you of something. It is a statistical truism to say that half of all professors are below average. So here is something, okay, so part of the reason that the MOOC was made so inexpensively, here's what you do. You get your family to play bit parts in your MOOC, right? They're very cheap. All you have to do is feed them and they will perform for you. So this, in fact, is our older daughter. she is modeling the idea that, oh, if you're trying to focus on something very difficult, you want to block out all sounds as much as possible and really focus intently. Now, the reason I'm showing this is she played a little bit part. Now, as it happens, she's about to finish medical school. And so she was in the audience, sitting much as you are with her medical school compatriots. There's nearly 100 of them. The professor, who is a well-known cardiologist in Southeast Michigan, was teaching. He's talking to them, and he suddenly stops the class, points at her, and says, you're the girl in the MOOC, right? So this esteemed, distinguished cardiologist was watching this MOOC in order to enhance his knowledge, right? His ability to become, to be a good physician. So it isn't just distinguished professors. I mean, we have youngsters who watch this MOOC, people in prisons, people all over the world, lots of people at universities, and then of course people in who are just in business and looking to expand the way they learn. But what this is really telling you is you can make materials for very inexpensive costs that people really want to watch and get a lot of value from. So there is a downside to MOOC making, right? So I should cover that. So that there's fan mail. People really like MOOCs. I mean, they do. So I get letters like this that say, this one says, I've been one of your students in learning how to learn. I'm currently studying a MOOC on mathematical modeling, which requires far more advanced mathematics than I've ever studied before. The old me would have given up in the first or second week. The new me is on course for honors. And here, this one says, I took your course Learning How to Learn, and you've changed my life completely for the better. Really, you've saved my life. Now, what's important to emphasize here is it is not me. It is the fact that if you effectively convey ideas from research, you are standing on the shoulders of giants, creating material that is incredibly effective in helping learners. So I am passionate about MOOCs because I've seen how much of a difference they can make in people's lives. Now, I should tell you just a little bit about my own background. I grew up moving all over the place. Actually, by the time I hit, I hit 10th grade, I had, so by the time I hit 10th grade, I'd lived in 10 different places in the US. Now, what this meant is some subjects, like mathematics, are very sequential. Well, for me, what happened was I was moving from Lubbock, Texas to Chelmsford, Massachusetts when I was about 7 years old, and they were suddenly very far ahead of me in mathematics. And at that time, I knew from then on, I just couldn't do math. And in fact, I couldn't do science, and I'm embarrassed to admit it, I flunked my way through elementary, middle, and high school math and science. And yet, I am standing in front of you as a professor of engineering, and it's not a fake. I've published in some of the top research journals in the world, so it is real. So what you might say, as one of my students once did, how did you do it? How did you change your brain? And I thought back, when my student asked that question, how did you change your brain? How did you do it? I thought back, here I was, this little kid, and I just loved, knitting and animals. This is the last cute picture of me. So I really loved, all sorts of, kind of soft and literary sorts of things. I grew up in a resolutely monolingual household. So you can guess what language I spoke as a child. I always wanted to learn another language. And so at that time, there wasn't a way to learn another language and, actually like make a living at the same time, except there was one way to do it, and that was to join the Army. So I did. That's me looking really nervous, about to throw a grenade, and if you knew how clumsy I am, you would know why I look so nervous. But I did learn another language. I learned Russian. I worked out on Soviet trawlers up in the Bering Sea, and I have some very good Russian drinking stories. And they drink a lot more than beer, that's for sure. And I just loved having new adventures and new perspectives. So I also ended up at the South Pole Station in Antarctica, and that's where I met my husband. So I always say I had to go to the end of the earth to meet that man. But the thing is, I always loved learning, having new perspectives and new adventures, but I began to realize something. We know that culture and language are important, but in today's modern society, math, science, and technology are important too. I worked with all these West Point engineers while I was in the service, in the Army, and I'd look at their books and I'd be like, oh my word, what is that stuff? It was just completely, but then I thought, now wait a minute, aren't I supposed to be open to new experiences? Isn't my mind supposed to be trying to get new perceptions? And more than that, I also realized that I had one sole professional expertise, the ability to speak Russian. And you know what? There is not much call for that. So I decided to try to change my brain. And that was at age 26. I went back, I started with remedial high school mathematics. And if you look at my books, they have like little dimples in them because I get so frustrated, I'd take a fork and I'd stab the book because I'd be so, it doesn't make sense. If I had known then what I know now about how you learn effectively, I could have made it much easier on myself. So what this is all telling us is that students are capable of far more than we might think. So when you have students who are, you're thinking, we tend to think, well, people are good at certain specializations, right? And they should follow their passion for math or engineering or art. But instead of following passion, why aren't we encouraging students to broaden their passions? Some things come easier. And if we encourage students to just follow their passions, they'll just pursue the things that are easy for them. So, but what society needs today is something that is much broader than that. Now, there's another thing that I just like to bring up and for you to be thinking about. As MOOC makers, we can teach much more broadly and with more creativity. Think about it. I am a professor of engineering, but I'm teaching a course about learning. You would think, hey, no, that should only come from a school of education. But if a school of education had been asked, we're so used to sort of a certain way of doing things, a school of education would have said, oh, I'm supposed to do a course on learning? Well, it should just be for teachers. No, if you said, no, not for teachers, I want it for people, just people, they would have gone and given 3 weeks on how to, what is the history of education, 3 more weeks on theories of education, 3 more weeks on how babies learn, and then finally, maybe a little practical information on learning. So what MOOCs can do is they can create this way of teaching others that can go beyond this conventional approach, the way we usually teach about things, and actually give people what they really need. So I do have to mention just sort of another thing, and Dr. King alluded to exactly this, and that is I did write a book, Mind for Numbers. In fact, I really like to write. So, I don't know, goes with the engineering somehow for me. And it did become a New York Times bestseller, but the reason, or best-selling science book, the reason for that is because of the MOOC. And the MOOC enhanced the book enhanced the MOOC. So if you're looking to make a MOOC, you can find your own professional career enhanced because of the sort of platform that it can give you. It has become an international bestseller. It's translated into many languages. The advance on the next book is really pretty nice. And the thing is that our daughter's in med school, so all the advances on the book go just to her death. So, and that speaks to another important aspect of MOOC making. Now, when professors, or when textbooks or books first started being printed in the 1500s or so, professors and teachers were adamantly against them because, why? Well, you could learn it from a book, and then you wouldn't need teachers anymore. Now we realize that books enhance teaching, just as teaching enhances books. They bring one another to life. MOOCs are a way of, they're like textbooks on steroids. They can bring what you're trying to teach. They're just a different way of teaching that can enhance the in-person teaching and what that in-person teacher is doing. So they're really quite a wonderful mechanism. You know, for me, I probably spend half the time, as usual, in my engineering classes because I have flipped classes. And my teaching evaluations, I won the university's Best Teaching Award. And for example, even this last semester, my last day of class, it's easy to look good with much less effort. Students actually lined up to say, why can't everyone have a nicely organized series of lectures that you can go, you can replay, you actually answer my emails when I email, and it's because I have time to do it. So you can enhance teaching with MOOCs and with online learning, and they're just a great mechanism for us. So I do have to add on a side note. So here is, in the United States, there's a very well-known radio show host called Ira Flato, and he does a show called Science Friday with millions of listeners. So I went to New York, I was invited to be on the show, and here I am with Ira and with Ben Carey from the New York Times. So I walk in there and I'm like, oh my gosh, you know, I'm meeting here these famous people, and Ben Carey's New York Times. He had also written a book on learning. And so we're both there, we're kind of talking to one another, and I'm like really intimidated because he's from the New York Times. And then I realize after a while, he's more intimidated because I have a MOOC, right? And the MOOC, I mean, my book has outsold his book like by orders of magnitude. Why? Because people like to watch MOOCs, at least well-made MOOCs. Now, one thing that I did was when I was writing the manuscript for A Mind for Numbers, I went to, there's a website called Rate My Professors in the English language, where you can download or find ratings for some of the top professors in the English-speaking world for all sorts of subjects like chemistry, physics, engineering, psychology, English, lots of different subjects. I took and found the top 3,000 or so professors who are often, they're best teachers, but they're often also best, really good researchers. And I found the emails of these people, and I emailed them, and I asked them if they would want to look at the manuscript for the book A Mind for Numbers. Shocking percentages of these individuals said yes. And so they wrote me back, and I found out a lot of good information. If you do ever read the book, you'll see all these little anecdotes. Those little anecdotes came from these emails. But one of the things that I found very interesting was a lot of these top professors, particularly in the STEM disciplines, science, technology, engineering, and math, they use metaphor and analogy to convey some of their key ideas. And by using metaphor and analogy, they were very shy about revealing this to me, because other professors would make fun of them for doing this. So here these really good teachers were made fun of for one of their techniques that was very effective. Why were they made fun of? They were felt to be dumbing down things. But we now know from neuroscience that metaphor and analogy, actually you use the same neural circuits for the metaphor as you do for the difficult scientific topic that you're trying to convey. So the more you can use metaphor and analogy, the better you can convey your material. So that's, we'll see that. We'll return to that point in just a few minutes. So let's look now at the brain and try and just get a little bit of insight into how it works, because it's relevant to how you make MOOCs. The brain, as we know, is extraordinarily complex, but we can simplify its operation into two fundamentally different modes. The first is the focus mode, and that's you turn your focus to something and boom, it's on. The second is the diffuse mode, and that's more like you're going out for a walk, you're not really thinking about something, but an idea will occur to you. You take a shower, you're sitting on a bus. All of these kinds of activities are more conducive to diffuse mode thinking. But to help you better understand the differences between these two modes, we're going to use an analogy. And the analogy we're going to use is that of a pinball machine. Now, people, if you're of a certain generation, you probably know how a pinball machine works. You just pull back on the plunger, and a ball will come boinking out and bouncing around on these rubber bumpers, and that's how you get points. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that pinball machine, and we're going to put it, right there on the human brain. So there's the brain, and you can see it's got its little ears here, and there's the nose, and we're going to put that pinball machine right on the brain. There you go. Okay. So if you look, there's the pinball machine on the brain, and this is an analogy for the focus mode. And in this way of thinking, look at how close together those rubber bumpers are. That's sort of how focus mode works. What happens is you've got a pattern in the focus part of in some part of your brain, and when you're thinking a thought in focus mode, for example, let's say that you're multiplying some numbers together, you think a thought, it takes off, and it moves along the patterns that have already been laid. But what if those patterns are something new, something you've never thought before? So let's say you've got your pattern here, that this is your multiplication, and this is, on the bottom, is division, and you've never done division before. How do you think about this pattern? I mean, how do you get to it? You've never thought it before, so it's really quite difficult. This can be that frustrating circumstance where you may be trying to do your first division problem, but you're using the wrong patterns to do it, and that's when you start to get frustrated. How do you find that new pattern? Turns out that you try and focus, you get frustrated, and then you step away and you use the diffuse mode. If the diffuse mode is, look at how different it is. Those sort of rubber bumpers are spaced much more widely apart. And when you think a thought, it takes off, moves along, and it can bounce much more widely. So you can't like think these fine-tuned patterns, you can't solve a multiplication problem, but you can get to a new part of the brain where you can start to create these new patterns. So by stopping, stepping back, doing something else, or involving yourself in some different activity, you can activate this sort of diffuse pattern and let yourself come to a better understanding. So what we often don't realize is you can be in focus mode or diffuse mode, but you can't be in both modes at the same time. So when you're focusing and you're focusing harder and even harder on something, you're actually blocking your ability to step back and look at whatever you're trying to solve from a new perspective so you can actually solve it. So the harder you're focusing, the more you're blocking yourself from getting to a solution. So that's a key point that's taught in the MOOC. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to play a little bit of a video. This is a snippet where I'm explaining the ideas that I've just explained. Now watch what happens. I'm here, suddenly I'm standing, and I can walk around amongst the metaphors that I'm talking about. If you look, if you study the history of science, you will discover that many of the greatest scientists would use this idea of imagining things so thoroughly that they could walk right into whatever kind of scientific scenario they were trying to understand. So for example, Barbara McClintock, the Nobel Prize winning discoverer of jumping genes, could actually imagine herself walking amongst genes. She could see that. Einstein, of course, imagined himself on a light wave. So by using these kinds of techniques where we walk around, or we can, it's almost like the way the weatherman on the television does his videoing. So if we use some of these same techniques, we can walk right in to the kind of ideas that we're trying to convey and make them much more real and concrete for students. Now, you might say, well, it must be really complicated to do something like that, and it actually isn't at all. This is my basement, except the only difference is my basement is actually usually a little messier than this. So what I did was, I went to Amazon.com and purchased, you can get any kind of a blue or a green cloth and create a green screen. And this costs, around $130, I think, for that whole, the stand and everything. And I just put it up there. I Googled up, how do you do a green screen studio? And that's how I set it up. I Googled, how do you set up lights? I got some videos. That's how I set things up. Again, I have no previous video experience whatsoever. This is a rocket science. It's the same thing kids are doing nowadays. We can be doing it too. So one thing that's important to point out is our attention spans are generally rather limited. We like to focus for a while and then take a break and use diffuse approaches. The reason we have students coming in and spending 2 hours in a class period, for example, is because it's more convenient for us, but it's not how our brains work. So short videos are very conducive to learning because they give a concrete little bit, then they can allow someone to step back and take a little break. So it's actually can be quite, it can be better than in-person teaching. So just a little sort of side note here, you can use MOOCs to help harden your educational system against other things that might arise. we never know. The world is very uncertain. So you could have a big epidemic come by. You want to have people staying in the house. Goodness knows there could be radiation, all sorts of different things could arise. And the more you can have an educational infrastructure that's there so that should something arise, people can watch from their homes, it can make things easier. Of course, part of the reason that I do online teaching is because it snows a lot in Michigan. So when it's a heavy snow day, we can't go to school, but you don't have to deal with that kind of problem. So that's a lucky thing for you. Now, you might say that, it's pretty clear that learning takes time. You often need to study, then kind of reflect on it and let it grow and so forth. But there's an issue with this, and we all know it, right? And that issue is procrastination. Procrastination is a huge, huge issue around the world. I have heard from more students about their problems with procrastination. We often believe that students are completely incapable of learning math, learning English, learning Chinese, learning all sorts of, and that's not, the real problem is not their incapability, it's simply that they procrastinate. So providing some powerful tools for procrastination can be very helpful. In fact, procrastination is so important that I just want to touch a little bit on it. Procrastination arises in part because when we even think about something we'd really rather not do, it activates an area of the brain that experiences pain. So the brain, so the brain responds. It tries to switch attention. So let's talk a little bit about how it does that. Procrastination is just a habit, and it arises because when we get a kind of a little bit of an unhappy feeling about things, when we think about something we'd rather not do, you switch your attention to something else, and when you do that, you feel better, almost instantly. You do this once, you do it twice, it's really no big deal, but you do it very often, and it can change your entire career path. So I'd like to just give a little bit of a preview of how do I talk about procrastination in the MOOC. I'll give you just a quick preview. This is the beginning of the little film snippet about procrastination.
Everybody has some issues with procrastination, because if you're working on something, it means you're not working on a lot of other things. But some people have more issues with procrastination than others. In this video, we're going to give you a little insight into procrastination, why it arises, and a powerful little tool to help you address it.
Okay, what am I doing with a tomato in my hand? That is the essence of some good MOOC making. I raise a question. I have something that seems completely unrelated. I'm sitting there fiddling with a tomato, and what I'm actually doing is I'm leading to the Pomodoro technique. And the Pomodoro, of course, is Italian for tomato, as I explained in the video, which is the Pomodoro technique was invented by an Italian, Francesco Cirillo, in the early 1980s. Procrastination is such a big issue that I'll quickly run through how do you use the Pomodoro technique. And basically, all you need to do is turn off all distractions. So that means your cell phone goes away, right? And have you ever done this thing where like you'll have your cell phone, you'll put it away, and then you look and it's back in your hand? I do that occasionally. So you make sure your computer has no little alarms, nothing goes off, and then you set a timer for 25 minutes and you focus for 25 minutes. Anybody can do that. And if you train kids to use this kind of technique, they can learn to focus more effectively early on. And then, except if you're like me, I'll be like, I'll be like 5 minutes into a Pomodoro, and then I'll realize I'm only 5 minutes into a Pomodoro. I'm like, I can't do 20 more minutes. And then I let that thought just go right on by, and I return to the attention, because that's what you need to do with a Pomodoro, is you want to work as effectively as you can. You're not going to be perfect, thoughts are going to arise, but that's okay. You just keep working as effectively as you can. And the big thing is reward yourself when you're done. Get your attention off it and relax a little bit. And now you understand that when you're learning something, and you're learning through putting your attention on it, but when you take your attention off of it, learning continues. And by giving yourself a little relaxation break, you can actually allow your creativity to think about it in new ways. So by a little break, what can you do? You can walk around, you can play a song that you like, you can talk to friends, chat, 5 minutes, something like that. But you'll find that you're more effective for taking that little break than if you just kept going and going and going relentlessly. Just a little side note, don't focus on finishing a task. So you don't want to sit there and say, hey, I'm going to do this Pomodoro, and I'm going to finish all my homework assignment. No, you don't want to do that, because that activates the pain center. Instead, you're just focusing as intently as you can on, say, your homework. Now, good learning is actually like baking a good cake. It has lots and lots of different ingredients. So another important ingredient in good learning is sleep. So I'll just play a little video here that talks about the importance of sleep, and it conveys an idea. You'll see all the graphics are just PowerPoint graphics. It's very simply done, and you can do things in a MOOC video that you can't do in real life, as you'll see. So I hope you see.
You might be surprised to learn that just plain being awake creates toxic products in your brain. How does the brain get rid of these poisons? Turns out that when you sleep, your brain cells shrink. This causes an increase in the space between your brain cells. It's like unblocking a stream. Fluid can flow past these cells and wash the toxins out. And now, time for a little sleep.
So again, you can just have fun with it and do things that are kind of communicate the excitement of what you're teaching about. Now, there's another reason that sleep is very important, and this is a light microscopy image. Light microscopy is a fantastic new technique that allows us to image living neurons, and this is indeed a living neuron before learning and before sleep, and this is the same exact neuron after learning and after sleep. If you look, here are these, wherever these little yellow triangles are, that's where new synaptic connections have formed. So sleep isn't just sort of, when nothing really happens. That's actually a critical time for learning, in that it's creating the neural architecture that we need for learning anything that's difficult, or anything at all, actually. So what this means is, it's important to space out, for students to space out their learning and to practice it day by day. You don't want to be cramming it, because if you cram it, you get these sort of little metabolic vampires that come by, and they can more easily suck those patterns away. I've had students come up to me and say, for example, I had one student come up to me and say, he showed me this test on statistics and probability for engineers, all red marked. I flunked him. And he said, how could you flunk me on this test? I understood it when you said it in class. And of course, that is not enough. Understanding is not enough. Practice along with that understanding is what creates the true understanding. So you can think of it metaphorically as when you're learning, you're sort of laying bricks And you need to put that mortar down and then let it dry. And that's how the learning occurs. If you don't let that mortar dry, it creates sort of this neural mess. This is highly relevant for us because what's happening now is through online learning, we can have students be practicing very difficult ideas and becoming more comfortable with them. We understand now that all expertise relates to developing these kinds of patterns. So I just got an email, for example, from this one man who used to work for McGraw-Hill, and he said the whole textbook industry is undergoing such dramatic changes, it's just extraordinary. And part of what they're doing is they're putting adaptive learning online so that people they can look at questions, they can learn at their own pace, they can get plenty of practice. We don't need to sit there and be grading a bunch of these assignments. And this is a huge and dramatic change that's unfolding right before our eyes. And MOOCs can take a real advantage of this kind of technology. So I just want to very quickly run through the idea of working memory and the importance of working memory. We used to think that there were 7 slots in working memory. So in other words, 7 items that we could hold, like 7 numbers, right? So 4, 5, 3, 2, 4, 3, 7, something like that. And we could hold those numbers temporarily in memory. Now we're beginning to understand it's more like 4 items that we can hold easily in memory. We tend to group things. So how you can think of focus mode is like an octopus that's reaching through those slots of working memory and making connections to items that you have in long-term memory, patterns that you have in long-term memory. And if you're doing something else, right, like paying attention to something on the side, listening to music, watching TV a little bit, you're not being nearly as effective with your focused memory or focused approach. Just by contrast, this is the diffuse mode, so it's really very random in how it does things. So how do you get information from working memory into long-term memory? Practice makes permanent. That's how you create these neural patterns. And it is through practicing. So I'll give you just a quick sense. The more you practice, the more you repeat, the richer, deeper, and broader your neural patterns become. Again, if you don't, those little metabolic vampires can make everything disappear. So now we're reaching probably one of the most important pedagogical ideas that is neglected, unfortunately, in a lot of pedagogical theory, but it actually is very, very important. And that is the idea of chunking. Chunking, when you look at some kind of, let's say you're trying to figure out a certain concept or a theory, the first time you look at it, your little working memory is going bonkers. And in fact, through imaging, we can see that your prefrontal cortex, where that working memory is really working hard when you're trying to figure out something for the first time. As soon as you figure out what the pattern actually is, then it's sort of like you've chunked the material. Instead of this hodgepodge, you've got one smooth pattern that you can draw easily to mind, and this is key. The other slots of working memory are still open. So you can make connections with that one pattern. Say you have a technique that you're using, and you tie it in with another technique, and voila, you've got something new. And so this is why getting these chunked patterns of expertise is very, very important. So I'll give you an example of chunking. So this is our younger daughter, right? So I was asking the family, okay, who would volunteer to back up a car really badly? And my younger daughter's like, Mom, I can do that. So this is her. Now, backing up a car is actually, once you learn how to do it, you've chunked it, right? When you first do it, it's crazy. You've got all this information coming at you, it just seems overwhelming, and it's really tough. But once you've learned how to back up a car, it's really quite simple. You can actually back it up even while you're talking to somebody and listening to something on the radio. No big deal. So watch her expression, and you'll see she's backing up the car badly. And it just brings to mind how difficult it can be. Look at, oh, she's confused, right? It's very difficult. And so then she backs sort of the wrong way, and then she's trying to back the other way. But again, once you've chunked it, it's easy. But this kind of chunking and this kind of expertise, it isn't just driving a car. It's obviously also in doing sports, in doing music, in practicing with music. It's in doing math and science, it's in learning language. Chunking is incredibly important for all sorts of different areas. So in fact, for practically everything you're learning. So what you're doing is you are creating, when you're chunking, you're creating this sort of library of patterns that you can use to make better connections with, think more creatively about things. So creating that library of chunks is an important first step, or an important final step in becoming an expert in anything. So just as we're wrapping up here, I want to give you just a few last pointers on why you might want to do a MOOC. First thing is, it gives you a chance to showcase the best lectures you've ever given in your life. Now, so I'll give an outtake. This is actually one of my worst lectures, but I got to cut it out. Come on.
Mistakes are very valuable to make, and that you're a little... go back to the start of this one.
So this was when I flubbed it, right? So my husband was so good. He was the man behind the camera a lot of times, just filming me, and I get my little diva moments, and he'd be, okay, come on, get your butt back over here. Let's get this wrapped up so we can go have lunch. But realistically, you can give great lectures, and if you do something wrong, you could just cut it out. So that's one of the valuable aspects. Also, of course, you can get good professional recognition, as I'd mentioned earlier. For me, this is me standing in front of I was recently a vice president of the IEEE Engineering and Medicine Biology Society. What you don't see, this is at the Milan conference, is there was actually standing room only in the talk I gave. And this was just about my research. You know, people would come to my research before, but when I did a MOOC, all of a sudden it's like everybody comes to see my research and my presentations. So, I mean, so basically, you know, you do a MOOC and you look really cool in front of colleagues. The other thing is you just have a lot of travel opportunities because people can see your work so much more easily. For me, I feel like I have friends in virtually any city around the world. I'm always like, you know, so embarrassed about it. I go to Silicon Valley. I was going to go visit my friend Julia at Coursera and, you know, give a talk there. So Julia's like, well, you got to do a meetup. And I'm like, oh man, I don't want to do a meetup. What if nobody comes? And then I'll be right there in Silicon Valley, right there. And Coursera people will be there, and I'll look really bad, you know. So she's like, no, you will do a meetup. So, we had like nearly 40 people at this meetup at Silicon Valley. It's just like you send an email out and they come up. I go to Cape Town, I go to Singapore, I go wherever I go, there's always somebody there. And again, it's not me, it's the MOOC that creates all of these new connections that have never been possible before. I do, when I speak, this is at Michigan Tech, there's a big overflow group there. And again, this is just because the MOOC provides sort of something that people find interesting and attractive. You find the best students through your MOOCs. You have the opportunity to select from amongst the best of the students worldwide. So there's tens of thousands of people who love your topic and can find out more about it. So the questions you get are far beyond those that you'll get in a conventional audience of maybe 25, 50 students. You'll meet interdisciplinary researchers, even through your MOOC, and who are interested in your topic. It's a great way to create new research relationships. It improves your in-person teaching. So, for example, I'm here, in Taiwan. While my students are watching my classes, truthfully, we know that testing helps improve student learning. So every time I meet my students, I give them a test, so they love it when I go out of town, because then I don't give a test. So you can flip the materials, and students really like we forget that if you explain something really well, a lot of times students don't understand a good explanation just because it's kind of going a little too fast for them. If they can repeat it, it's perfect. So having video materials online is extremely helpful. There's lots of opportunities for educational research with big data. And I have to say that teaching with a MOOC is addictive. You just have this broad outreach and much broader sense of what's going on in your particular area of research and expertise that is like nothing you've ever seen before. And the universities that realize this are going to be ahead of the pack. It is extremely important if you want to remain competitive on a world basis. Again, it's a very competitive world out there, but people are going to be seeing the universities that have MOOCs, and those universities are going to rise in the world's eyes. So making a MOOC can change your life in profound ways. What are you waiting for?